Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Whether you're a pastor, church leader, or a passionate member of your faith community, this podcast is designed to challenge, inspire, and equip you with the tools you need for impactful ministry. And now for a little bit about the guest for this episode.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today, Martha Tatarnic welcomes Joelle Kidd to the show. Joelle is a writer, award-winning journalist, and editor who lives in a book-filled basement apartment in Toronto, Her work has appeared in outlets such as The Walrus, This Magazine, LitHub, The Rumpus, and Extra Magazine. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Guelph. Jesusland is her first book. A reminder before we start today's conversation, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share Future Christian with a friend. You can connect with Lauren, Martha, and Future Christian on Instagram. You can send us an email at lauren@resonatemediapro.com with questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes. We appreciate your voice and how we faithfully discern the future of the church.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. I'm your host for today's episode, Martha Tatarnic, and I'm happy today to be joined by Joelle Kidd. Welcome, Joelle.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so normally, we kind of have our standard opening and closing questions that we ask all of our guests. But as I was reflecting on our conversation today, Joelle, I was realizing that a lot of what you talk about in your book would be things that we would normally cover in those opening questions. So I don't want to, let the cat out of the bag too early and then be repetitive when we get to your book. So instead, I think it would just help to frame our conversation if we gave our listeners a bit of a sense of who you are and what you do. Our paths intersected through writing in the Anglican Church. You were on staff for our national Anglican newspaper for a time, but can you just share with our audience where you are now and what your work is as a writer, what you're up to?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a writer. I've been working in newspapers and magazines for most of my career, including at that Anglican newspaper you mentioned. But I always have written, and I've always wanted to write fiction. So most recently, I just completed a master's program in creative writing in fiction, and have been working on a novel. But in between all that, I wrote this book that we're going to talk about today, and which is essays, creative nonfiction. So it's kind of a blend of those two things: the more journalistic work I've done, and my love of creative writing. But yeah, I'm living here in Toronto. I grew up in Winnipeg and grew up going to a sort of evangelical, conservative Christian school. And so that's what really shaped my experience that I wrote about in the book.
Yeah, so we're definitely going to dive into that quite a bit. I find that interesting. I actually didn't know the pieces around creative writing. And I have to say, as a writer myself, although everything that I have published has been in the realm of nonfiction, I really have to actually force myself to read nonfiction. My heart is totally in the realm of fiction, and I always thought I would write novels, not nonfiction memoirs, churchy sort of things. But it's funny the way that life
still
unfolds.
Can.
I still can. I have a few unpublished novels that
Oh,
are
nice.
sitting on USB sticks here and there.
Nice.
So, whether
Yeah.
the world actually needs to read those or not, I don't know. You have some unpublished novels as well?
Oh, yeah.
I love
Hopefully
it.
one day.
Yeah, well, that's really exciting. Like, you're done your master's in creative writing now?
Yeah, I just finished that up last October, I guess. So, yeah.
Congratulations. That
Yeah.
that must have been pretty exciting. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into our main topic of conversation because I'm really eager to talk to you about your new book, which is called Jesusland. Catchy title. And I'm just going to sketch out a little bit for our readers what it is about and how it's shaped, encouraging everybody to get a copy and read it. It is part memoir of your time growing up in a fundamentalist Christian environment. It's really part cultural commentary and looking at like Christian pop culture of the early aughts and how that was intersecting with pop culture as a whole, how it was its own distinct thing where these two parallel tracks had influence on one another. And I was particularly interested in some of the ways that we're experiencing the influence of those ideas that you grew up with on our political landscape today. So it's a really like rich and timely book. Can you start by sharing with our listeners a bit about the church that you grew up in, but particularly that private Christian school that is such a feature of Jesusland? What were the distinguishing characteristics? What were the beliefs and the environment there?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, part of the impetus for the book, I think, was because I came into it. I grew up in it after a certain point, and so I kind of came to it late. My family lived in Eastern Europe when I was younger, and when we moved back to Canada, started going to this Christian school. And my family, I come from like a Mennonite tradition. And the churches I went to growing up were small community churches. And so when I started going to this Christian school, this idea of Christian pop culture was really foreign to me. And I felt very behind on it. All my peers like knew all these Christian bands and Christian movies, and et cetera, et cetera. But the school I went to, so it was a non-denominational school. Those kind of affiliated with some Baptist and Pentecostal communities. And I think it fell into this very common North American thing where non-denominational kind of just means conservative evangelical.
Right, yeah.
Which I don't think is actually very helpful because the message I absorbed was that this is just sort of like, this is what Christian means with a capital C. And I didn't really know about other denominations and practices. I don't think I like even knew what the Anglican Church was as a kid.
Yeah.
We had one Catholic student in our grade everyone was trying to convert him because he wasn't like a real Christian or something.
Not a real Christian, yeah.
Yeah.
Anglicans, I'm sure, would not be real Christians either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so some of the distinguishing beliefs that I thought were really emphasized were this evangelical framework, like this Great Commission, the emphasis on needing to evangelize others, the need to accept Jesus as your personal savior, to go to heaven. There was a big emphasis on purity, sexual abstinence, and also just like purity of thought. I think the Christian pop culture connected there too, where it was you were meant to only absorb Christian media as a way to keep yourself pure from any outside influences. We were taught creationism and very like literal interpretation of the Bible. that idea that every word in the Bible is true and is sort of equalized. Everything is worth the same amount. Yeah.
I was like really struck by the comprehensiveness of like the pop culture that you were, the Christian pop culture that you were fed. Like, it wasn't just the music, it wasn't just the movies, it was magazines, it was YA novels, it was like everything that you were reading and consuming was like through this particular Christian lens. And so that, like, that sense of having to like be protected from the outside world, or like to have sort of an exclusive like culture that provides everything for you, like that's so different from what I was raised with. Like when I started as a teenager to think that I was called to ministry, like my dad's immediate reaction was like, okay, well, make sure that you're reading really widely and that you're like taking courses that like challenge your beliefs, like don't get yourself cut off from the world, like make sure that you're staying connected to that you don't become like part of a Christian bubble. But like it really was a Christian bubble, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great that your dad said that to you. I think that's really important. Yeah, like my like kind of quippy thing is I feel like, I don't know if you heard this a lot in your corner of the church, but growing up, I feel like I often heard this phrase that you're supposed to be in the world, but not of it. And to me, the Christian pop culture bubble is really you're of the world somehow, but you're not in it. You're so separated from the real world, but they're taking on all the trappings of like secular pop culture and a lot of the sort of toxic messages that you're taught outside of that bubble too. So
yeah, I definitely want to dig into that a little bit more because I was quite fascinated by some of those dynamics, and again comparing them to what I grew up with. But gosh, there was even like a part toward the end where you talk about like Christian comedians and this worry that like maybe like you couldn't be funny as a Christian, like the Christians actually couldn't have a good sense of humor. Like I had no idea that that was a thing.
Yeah, even wanting to write novels and write fiction as a kid, I was so worried that, like, could I do that? Because all the Christian novels I read were so terrible. Or I didn't really want to write about, Christianity in fiction.
Like, were you getting exposed to some other things through your family as well? Or were those years where you were just pretty much, like, locked in?
I definitely was. My family wasn't very tapped into that. Even reading the book, I gave the book to my parents to read before it went into copy editing, and they were kind of shocked that they didn't even know half this stuff existed. They weren't really paying attention to the pop culture stuff. But so most of it came through my school and my friends at school. But yeah, I think I valued my parents' influence more because I think the books and the music and movies that they showed me or that I watched with them were the ones that I actually related to a lot more than these Christian media that I consumed with my friends.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that kind of like that gets into what I found to be such a page turner about the book. Like, I found it extremely absorbing because it was this mix of like dynamics that I found very relatable, but like pop culture that I wasn't familiar with at all. And I think that you do such a good job of like really compelling description of what it like what growing up feels like and what growing up feels like when you're trying to fit in, and like when you feel like you're a bit out of step with the people around you and you're trying to make sense of what messages you're getting and how you fit into that. Like all of that is extremely relatable. Like I know about that stuff. Like friendship and in crowds and out crowds and, all that stuff. Insecurity, like just navigating how you figure out who you are.
Yeah.
And then like experiencing within all of that, these places of real conflict and tension as you like tried to fit yourself into a narrative and like beliefs that actually like didn't feel like they fit for you. What would you like describe as some of the positives of your faith upbringing?
Yeah, there were certainly a lot of positives. I mentioned my family being sort of on the outside of this Christian bubble in a way. I come from a very close-knit family, coming from the Mennonite church, and I had a lot of, I think, really good experiences in Mennonite communities, whether that's my grandparents' little house church that they ran, or the small community church we attended when I was growing up. I was related pretty strongly to the values that were being taught there about like justice and peace, and community, and that sense of closeness that comes with like a small group like that where you're having church potlucks every week. And I think there were good things to be found in the school I attended also. It was also a pretty small school, and so there were definitely there was like a comfort in that, and even though in retrospect I don't really agree or appreciate with a lot of the teachings I was given there, it's an institution, so it's full of people, and on a person-to-person level, like there were certainly a lot of really kind and caring teachers and friends that I made there. So, yeah, there was a kind of, I guess, comfort and sense of belonging in some ways that faith gave me when I was growing up.
Do you have some of those friendships endured kind of past the leaving of that tradition?
I have one really close friend still that I grew up going to school with, and one more like see each other every so often kind of friend. So I'm down to 2, but it was a very small school, so percentage-wise, it's pretty good. But
yeah, I think that's better than I'm doing from high school.
Yeah.
So. That's good. Like, has that friend read the book, The Close Friend? Do they?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
I'll need to mail it to her.
It'll be interesting to like see what her reaction is and what she recognizes there.
Yeah, I think that's something interesting about those lifelong friendships because, yeah, she and I have also, and maybe this is another positive of growing up like in a religious environment. I think the kind of friendships I have with people that I met after I graduated high school, I spent a little bit of time working for a Christian missions organization, and again, an environment where I felt a little at odds politically and philosophically with a lot of people, but the friendships I made there also feel really strong because you're talking about such deep, important things, and you're really sharing like something that you don't necessarily share in your life with other friends, other friendships that you just sort of meet, in the wild. So
yeah,
so it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's insightful. I mean, you certainly don't shy away from delving into the stuff that was quite damaging in your faith upbringing. Do you want to just share some of those notes?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the most damaging parts were really focused around like shame, and there's been more and more research and writing in recent years about the what they call a purity culture of the 90s and 2000s, which I think continues even now, but that felt like a very concentrated moment for it, where evangelical pop culture and a lot of conservative messaging really focused heavily on sexual purity, but also, like I mentioned before, like purity of your thoughts and this need to like sort of reach a kind of perfection to be acceptable as a Christian. And so, yeah, those kinds of teachings really gave me a lot of shame about my body, my identity. And yeah, as I write in the book, like I identify as queer, but I really suppressed that part of myself for a long time because of those teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even the sort of like the threats of hell or this sort of punitive way of talking about Christianity really plays into that shame-based thing also. Yeah, and there were also some harmful messages I absorbed about women, about queer people, some really like politically conservative readings of the Bible that I was taught, that I think feed into like a colonial, like white supremacist history of Christianity, that I think now I see a lot of. Even when I was working for the Anglican Church, I saw a lot of people doing a lot of work to unlearn and decolonize those aspects of Christianity. But in my experience when I was growing up, that was very much still entrenched in what we were taught.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's I guess not just that like there's a perfectionism, but there's such a narrow understanding of what perfect looks like, and
yes,
yeah, how you like need to fit into that. I was really struck, and again this like goes to the relatable versus foreign parts of what you were describing in the book. I was just really struck by the shame that you talk about. And like regular listeners of this podcast will know that I grew up like thoroughly mainline Christian. But I also grew up with lots of messages of shame around my body. Like secular mainstream culture tells us lots of unhelpful things about sex and body image and the role of men and women and blame about sex and how we're supposed to think about our bodies. Like, you don't need to be part of a fundamentalist evangelical church to absorb really bad messages about like, you know, how we're supposed to look and how we're supposed to act and how we're supposed to feel inadequate, you know? Like I think that we can all grow up feeling like there are impossible standards that we can never actually attain. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, like I grew up in a very small town in rural Ontario, and in the town that I grew up in, like there was not one out person in my whole high school. Like it was in many ways a very conservative town. And yet it was actually in my church that I really considered LGBTQ rights and like it was from my Christian perspective that like I argued in my law class that same-sex couples should be able to adopt, for example. Like that was like an opinion that stood really at odds with the secular culture that I grew up in. And in many ways, like, I think that's what excited me about being a Christian, was the sense that our Christian tradition could have like ways of clapping back to the toxic messages that we absorb and saying something different and like challenging the status quo. And yet, like, as you said, in the Anglican Church as well, and certainly like in Christianity in general, Christianity can just totally get co-opted into saying the same toxic things, maybe with different packaging. Like, what would be sort of your imaginings about like Christianity as an alternative versus just like one more place where you get the same old messages of guilt and inadequacy?
Yeah, I mean, I love that was the catalyst for you, because I think there is a real possibility there. Like, it really still appeals to me, thinking about like the stories that I read of, like the Gospels, stories of Jesus that are these sort of radical reimaginings. They are like sort of upending the system, or like those teachings that really like dig further beneath the surface. And I think that's where I see a lot of possibility for Christianity, is to sort of undermine these systems that are in power in the wider world. I guess one of the main theses that I came away with after writing the book is that I just don't think there should be Christian pop culture. Like, this sort of marriage of religion and capitalism, I think, is where those messages start to get co-opted and things start to really solidify in an unhelpful way, because I think a lot of what gets commoditized is not it's not there to help everyone. It's there to keep one group in power at the top.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, when you bring that kind of hierarchy into religion, I think it's not what was taught in the Bible, I think.
Yeah. Can you just like describe some of that like capitalistic infiltration of the culture you grew up in? Because it really was of a moment, wasn't it, where like there were big bucks available in like Christian media of a whole variety of things.
It's such an interesting time to me. One thing that really interested me about that period was this sort of mainstream crossover at the time that happened in the 2000s. You had like pop stars wearing purity rings, and the rise of like some laws that changed in the States around the late 90s, early 2000s meant that Christian groups could lobby quite with no holds barred lobbying in the political sphere. And so you had the rise of this like issues voter that got George Bush into office, that was really like this fundamentalist Christian worldview. I was shocked at how much money was poured into abstinence-only education, for instance, in that time period. So yeah, there was a weird marriage of like the secular and the Christian at the time. And also it was just a high point for like for pop culture to make money. Right before the internet came in and undermined a whole bunch of industries, it was still possible to be making a lot of money through book sales and through CD record companies and like independent movie distribution. And so, I think that's part of it. And part of what was interesting is that you had these Christian bookstores that were these hubs of all this Christian media that were actually really making a lot of money in that time period. And about 10 years later, they were almost all bankrupt. So it was kind of a concentrated point of all that culture being distributed. And one thing I write about a little bit too is that a lot of the production of that media was happening in the United States, and then it was being exported. And me in the middle of Canada, I was reading stuff coming from Focused on the Family that I didn't even know that was who was printing the magazine I was reading. And none of my teachers and my parents looked at it. They just thought, it's Christian, it must be good. And
right.
Lots of messages were getting slipped in under the wire.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple of points of intersection that definitely did infiltrate my experience back in the early aughts as well, even though lots of what you describe I didn't know about at all. But it was such a big deal when Mel Gibson did The Passion of the Christ.
Yeah.
And I remember all of the front pages of People and so on for a while. We're all kind of talking about is Christianity suddenly cool? All of these big stars are suddenly being very vocal about their faith. So it did have this interesting back and forth. I wonder now, as you say, there isn't the same kind of money to be made in book sales and CD sales and stuff now, but there's still lots of money to be made in Christianity, right? Is there any connection between what you were growing up with and the mega churches of today and kind of the celebrity pastors, the there's sort of Christian influencers now, right?
Yeah. I kind of think that's where the gold rush is now. I think
the gold rush, yeah.
Social media. There are a lot of fundamentalist influencers out there. Tangential to that, there's been a lot of talk about this movement of trad wives, women who stay home and showcase this traditional vision of marriage and motherhood. And a lot of that is, I think, very similar. It's sort of repackaging these same ideas into a new format. And even though in a way, it feels a little more like grassroots because it's a person putting themselves out there, I think it still has, I think they still get kind of locked into a cycle of having to perform that might also be pretty damaging in the long run. But yeah, I think also more recent things like Hillsong Church or just sort of mega churches that act almost like big franchise corporations or something, expanding over the world and selling music or selling or doing podcasts or whatever. It's the Christian pop culture machine is still going strong.
Yeah, it's still going strong. They have figured out how to adapt. I interviewed Mike Cosper a couple of months ago who did that podcast on the rise and fall of Mars Hill.
Podcast.
Yeah, and he's written a couple of books about all of those dynamics as well, and just kind of the really dangerous dynamics of ideological thinking that can get locked into a message that seemingly seems like it should be good. And so people are kind of willing to overlook a lot of stuff that is clearly at odds with that message because, they want the message to succeed.
Yeah.
I think I was I just kept feeling like, as I was reading your book, that there are ramifications of all of this pop culture that, seemingly, okay, like, so what if there are movies about, people turning their lives around because of Jesus, or like books about the rapture, or purity rings, or, like Jesus is my boyfriend albums, or whatever. Like it doesn't maybe feel like it's that serious, but it does feel like there are a lot of political ramifications of the stuff that was circulating like 20, 25 years ago. Like what felt like timely to you about revisiting all of this part of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. It felt too timely.
Too timely.
Yeah, I pitched the book in 2023 and spent a year writing it. And while I was researching and writing, I just couldn't believe like how, I don't know if I realized how relevant it would feel. Yeah, not only the politics and the themes that I think are sort of like popping up again and again, but even the same people. I'd be reading, there's a great book, Marcy McDonald's The Armageddon Factor, about Christian nationalism in Canada in the 2000s. And so I'm reading that, and up pops a young Pierre Poilievre, or I'm reading about right-wing movements in the States, and the laws are being made by Mike Huckabee, who now has like a big right-wing talk show. And yeah, it's the same people, same players. When you dig a little deeper past the surface of these pop culture things, I mean, I think Left Behind is like a great example, where growing up I thought of that as a kind of mildly terrifying but kind of silly book that was everywhere. It was like being sold at Costco. Everyone was reading it, but I didn't really see it as having any political import. And when I was researching the book, I didn't realize that the writer of that novel, like, he has huge political influence. He, like, was instrumental in a lot of conservative political anti-LGBT legislation, and he was on the National Evangelical Council or something. He kind of like codified this belief in the rapture that is laid out in the book as part of the theology of that denomination, or that like segment of Christianity, which is so much more recent than I thought. So yeah, and even earlier in the 70s, he and his wife like wrote a book about Christian marriage that has a lot of really troubling complementarianism and misogyny and purity stuff in it. That was really influential. So yeah, even just that one guy, his trail is a lot longer than I realized. But yeah, it feels relevant in the sense too of Trump was selling $60 Bibles with his name on them during the campaign, and J.D. Vance is making speeches that sound a lot like Mark Driscoll sermons, and yeah, everything feels like it's sort of coming back to roost a little bit in my mind. The generation that grew up with those things is sort of, my generation's in our 30s and 40s now, I guess. I think J.D. Vance is 40, so he probably grew up listening to Christian music of the same time period I did. And yeah, it feels like a little bit of that, a little bit of backlash to some more socially progressive years, all kind of combining into this strange soup.
Yeah, strange soup indeed. And I mean, Trump has been elected for his second term. Both times around, I understand that evangelical voting bloc was essential in his election. I'm not sure that we have quite the same political dynamics here. I'm sure that there are voting blocks in Canada as well, but I'm not sure that they have quite the same influence. Like, he needed to lock into that voting block in order to have a chance of being elected.
Yeah, exactly. You can really see like the candidates in the states have to cater to that group. You can tell. I mean, it's like Donald Trump doesn't look like any Christian I grew up with, but he still manages to win people over.
Well, and I mean, again, like I do spend a lot of time kind of puzzling around evangelical fundamentalist teaching and culture, because there are aspects of it that I don't understand at all. But, you noted like right at the outset that there was this sense of like every word of the Bible is to be taken like as seriously as every other word. And I know what you mean by that, but it's also like not true, right? Like, because there's whole parts around like justice and care for the poor and like, providing like food for people that is really neglected in favor of sort of single issue focus around, like in the States, abortion, for example, right? Like, that becomes the issue that gets raised so far above like any of the other like words of the Bible that I would think we should be taking pretty seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of issues that aren't I mean, there's so many places in the Bible that just clearly say take care of the poor, take care of the widows and the orphans, and there's not the same clarity around some of these issues like abortion or same-sex marriage or what have you, but those become the hot button topics that the whole politics of the religion hinge on. Which again I kind of tend to see as another like way of where capital flows and ways to consolidate political power.
Yeah, I think that is ultimately what it is. I'm interested in where your faith sits now. Like, you have worked for the Anglican Church. You've written a book that's all about wrestling with the good, the bad, and the ugly of one particular version of Christian culture. Like, obviously, the Christian faith is alive in you in a particular way, as in, like, it's something that occupies real estate in your brain. Maybe rent-free, I don't know. What is your relationship with the church now, or with the Christian faith?
It's hard to say. I feel I have a pretty uneasy relationship with it, I think. When it comes to church and organized religion, I've kind of broken up with it a little bit. I feel like I still have some faith and some spiritual side of myself, but I've kind of given up on the term Christian, and I don't know. I feel really lucky to have had the faith journey that I've had, or like been able to experience a lot of different sides of Christianity. And in my adult life, I've definitely found some really beautiful communities of faith that were aligned with my, progressive lefty politics, and accepted my queerness and read the Bible in non-literal, very deep and thoughtful ways. So I know those communities exist, and I might someday make my way back to one of them. I'm not sure, but yeah, personally, I think I just have felt a sense of being kind of like burned one too many times by the like church at large. And I think a lot of people share a similar feeling of, in the last few years, even thinking about since Donald Trump's first rise to power, like the way that Christianity is sort of in the popular imagination become this really, really sort of hate-filled, like nationalistic, right-wing version of itself. Feels really hard to deal with, because to consider yourself a part of that community, and even siblings in Christ with people who have actual hatred for people of your identity, it's difficult. I don't think it feels good, and so it stopped feeling like a word I could use for myself. But yeah, I don't know. I'm in a real unknowing space right now. I think after I went to a spiritual advisor a few years ago, and I think what I learned from talking with him was that after so many years growing up in this very black and white, rigid kind of environment around faith, it felt really good to be able to say that I don't need to know right now, and I can live in a little bit of uncertainty.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that was the sense I got from your book as well, is that, like, there's not a closed door, because obviously these are things that, like I said, are still like working away in you and you're processing and so on. But there's definitely a need for distance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, my kids are both teenagers, and it's interesting when they reflect with me about all of the, like, unpacking that they sort of have to do with their friends when they say that they go to church or that they're a Christian. Like my daughter especially is sort of like, yeah, I'm going to church. Like, these are all the things that doesn't mean.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and like, it's even my son, who goes to a Roman Catholic high school, he, tells me that most of his friends have a particular sense of what Christianity means that is very much about, like, anti-LGBTQ, anti-woman, anti-climate,
Yeah.
like pro-patriarchy, and just like that they have an extremely negative view of Christianity. And yeah, Christians are not helped by some of the loudest representations of what Christianity supposedly means right now.
Yeah.
Would you have, like, any takeaways that you would, like, we primarily offer this podcast for people who are leaders in the church and trying to figure out how we navigate, like, the leadership in the church in a world that's so chaotic, and where we are, like, dealing with such tremendous trends around, like, decline in the church and culture wars in the church and all of those things. Like, would you have things that you would want Christian leaders to think about, like, in how they minister with young people, but maybe just in how they, like, respond to the world in general? Like, what would you want to hear from Christian leaders?
I think what comes to mind is, I talked a little bit about that idea of shame being what I found most damaging in the church, and I think the way that kind of was taught to me was through this this conception of self that really kind of took away my autonomy as a person. I think culturally we're much better at this now with kids than we used to be, but I think it's important to teach young people, especially, that they're valued and they have meaning and control over their own self, and they can have boundaries, and connect with their own emotions and their bodies. But growing up in the church, I got the message that nothing I had was my own. It was my body and my mind. Everything was a tool for God to use, or a house for God. And that, I think that idea is like wrapped up in that shame idea, and also something that really persisted in a negative way into my adulthood. So that's kind of my woo-woo answer, but I think that like teaching people like self-love and to value themselves rather than to be some kind of like robot for God to pilot, I think it would be a much more helpful tact, especially for young people.
Yeah, friend of mine who I've had on this podcast, he talks about some of the really young women who were leaders in the early church, and they get labeled the virgin martyrs, but he like reframes them as women of self-possession, which I just love. Like women of self-possession that like that there was like this robust alternative for women in the early church, especially to defy like gender conventions, to not be a piece of property passed from man to man, but like to have a voice and to stand up and to like bear witness and like defy convention. I like that. That self-possession, I think, is a teaching that we can see across like scripture and across the tradition, but maybe we could like boost that up a little bit in our teachings.
Yeah, I love that phrase, self-possession.
Yeah. Okay, well, why don't we take a break, and we'll come back for some closing questions. And yeah, thank you for helping us walk through some of the points of your book. There's so much more to get into. And so I really hope that our listeners will pick up a copy, because there's many parts of it that we haven't been able to touch on, but I'm glad that we got to talk through some of the points. So we'll come back in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the Future Christian Podcast. I'm with Joelle Kidd today, and we are going to wrap up with our closing questions, rapid fire, that we ask all of our guests. And we do always tell our guests that you don't have to take these questions super seriously. It can be as light or as serious as you want. It's up to you. So, Joelle, if you were Pope for the day, what would that 24 hours look like? What would be the top priorities?
I don't really know how to answer this one. I mean, am I allowed to say let women be priests? Is that in the Catholic Church? Is that allowed? But
you are totally, I mean, you're Pope, so you can say whatever you want. You're in charge. That's kind of the takeaway.
Yeah, I think I'd institute some DEI reforms into Christianity. It's funny because I asked my partner this, because I was like, what would you say to this? And they went, well, I would declare myself Pope tomorrow too. So I was like, you can't do that. I would wish for more wishes.
I know. I was just going to say that's totally the genie in the bottle. Like,
yeah,
I want more wishes. I don't know. I mean, you can say that too. Like, I would use my day to make myself Pope for the rest of time.
I don't know if I would want that power.
Yeah, it might get old.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that the ordination of women or some DEI policies would be a good use of that day. Is there a theologian, a historical Christian figure who you would want to meet, bring back to life, have supper with?
I have been a little bit obsessed recently with Simone Weil, the French philosopher and Christian mystic. And I have her book Gravity and Grace on my night table right now. I've been slowly reading. And she's such a strange, complicated person, but her writing really speaks to me. So that's who I would definitely bring back. And also just as a fervent socialist, I would love to hear her thoughts on our current political landscape.
Yeah, that would definitely be a dinner conversation worth having.
Yeah.
What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
It feels like we're in a very historical moment. So I feel like a lot will be remembered. I think we're moving really fast technologically, and we're also destroying the planet at a very quick rate. It just feels like everything is shifting a lot, and I think in future times, that hackneyed 2020 pandemic phrase of living in unprecedented times, that just sort of felt like it never ended. And I feel like this era is going to be remembered for being uncertain and unprecedented.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that we can guarantee that if there is a future, historians will be talking about this time, this current time, and what was going on. Do you have a hope for the future of Christianity?
I hope it becomes softer is the word that comes to mind. I hope that the Christianity of the future is less militant and less hierarchical and more grassroots and honest. And I hope, I've been saying, that it can kind of divorce itself from capitalism, and that there are a lot of beautiful streams of thought in Christianity and liberation theology and decolonial Christianity that I hope just keep gathering force and becoming more and more prominent in the faith.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the word softer to talk about that picture of what Christianity could be, because there's also a lot of defiance that would be needed to be able to embrace that way. We're gonna need spines of steel for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess in the way that water is soft, where it can erode a rock, but it won't
that's
hurt
good.
you.
That's good. That's really good. Where can people find out more about you, Joelle?
Well, I'm online. My website is joellekidd.com. I have a pretty rare name, so I got the URL. And my book, Jesusland, is out August 12th, where you can find out too much about me, probably. And I'm not very good at social media, but I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram under my name as well.
Okay. Well, we always end with a word of peace, so may God's peace be with you, Joelle.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is produced by Resonate Media. We love to hear from our listeners with questions, comments, and ideas for future episodes. Visit our website at future-christian.com and find the Connect with Us form at the bottom of the page to get in touch with Martha or Lauren. But before you go, do us a favor. Subscribe to the pod to leave a review. It really helps us get this out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.